Well, good morning. This is Scott over at ReadySquirrel.com, and today I'm going to discuss an article that I wrote last week on the number one survival skill. Just to give you a little background on me, I am by no means a professional. I do have a military background, and I've spent a lot of time as an outdoorsman. I've always been interested in bushcraft and survival in general. One of the things that's always amazed me is how people act differently under survival type or emergency situations. So I wrote a little article about it. I did a little bit of research. If you don't want to listen to me gab, you can head on over to ReadySquirrel.com. I'll have a link down below in the comments where you can just go right over and kind of cherry pick and read through if you'd like to. One of the things that I found interesting about this subject is how the brain changes and the body chemistry changes when we are faced with a situation where we feel like we're under imminent threat. And we start out in a normal operation with what's called the pre-survival brain, or that's what I'm calling it. That's not really what it's called, the everyday brain, if you will. Relatively calm, peaceful, curious, and you're not walking around worried about making mistakes because you're not in a life-threatening situation. When something bad happens, when something goes south, plane crashes, you get marooned, your ship sinks, and you're on a life raft, most people go into survival brain mode. And survival brain mode is basically fight or flight, a mode where the brain dumps cortisol, you get stressed out, you can't think straight. And for a brief period, this is a good thing because it makes you look at the threat and you either hightail it or you start to calm down, hopefully. The downside of this survival brain mode where the brain's dumping cortisol and you're under severe stress is the longer you stay in survival brain, the harder it is to get out of it. That's number one. And number two, if you stay in that mode, that hypersensitive mode, then you become physically and mentally exhausted. So I'm not going to read too much into each one of these sections because if that's something that interests you, you can go over and check the article out. But in the article, I talk about what stress is, 11 signs of stress in a survival situation, and how that affects you. You know, if you know some of this stuff ahead of time, you can train yourself or you can be aware of it, and I think that will take some of the pressure off. So 11 signs of stress, again, difficulty making decisions, angry outbursts, forgetfulness, low energy level, constant worry, tendency to make mistakes, carelessness, and the big one, the one that really I know after writing this article that knocks you out is feeling of hopelessness. Like you really, really got to fight that because that will lead to apathy and you'll give up. So what are the 9 stressors in a survival situation? I always think of that show Alone. I don't know if any of you watch that. It's on the History Channel. And I think just about every episode I've watched, the chopper flies into the area where they're going to get dropped off. You don't really know where that's going to be. And almost everybody says when they're videoing themselves, their very first video, they didn't realize like the impact it was going to have seeing that chopper fly off because of the realization that, hey, it's just me. I'm out here. I could be out here for 3 months and I'm going to be feeding myself. I'm going to be protecting myself and I don't have anybody to commiserate with. So just the very fact that you're in a situation like that can be a stressor. But then the other stressors are pain, heat, cold, death, and that's not your death. That's like if you get in a plane crash or something like that and maybe somebody close to you or your fellow passengers unfortunately pass away. Uncertainty, your general environment. You know, you could be in a jungle with huge bugs and highly poisonous snakes. You could be in super cold weather, or you could be in the middle of the desert and you know you're gonna have a hard time finding water. Hunger, thirst, fatigue, and then again isolation. So there's 7 common reactions to stress in a survival situation: boredom, impatience, guilt, anger, depression, anxiety, and fear. when you go into that survival brain, there's a couple different phases that you can go into, and you kind of bounce back and forth between the two. The crisis phase, that's when you're freaking out. And the coping phase, that's when hopefully, and some people never get out of this phase. Some people never, ever get out of the crisis phase. They stay there. And that's why you see people not survive situations that seem somewhat innocuous. I mean, they could have all the training in the world. They could have all the gear they need. They could have food. They could have decent weather. And for some reason, they don't survive. And I've got some examples of that down below that I got from the Air Force SEER manual. So the crisis phase, you realize how bad the situation is. It's like you're on the show alone. You see that chopper, flying away, and you know that it's just you. It's where the rubber hits the road. You're living under conditions you aren't used to. There's nobody coming to help. Your safety net's gone. The main goal of survival is to spend as little time as possible in the crisis phase. The stressors that we talked about earlier can start to kick in. Pain, heat, cold, uncertainty, self-doubt. You're talking to yourself in a negative way. You're not talking to yourself in a way that's conducive to long-term survival, if that's what you have to do. So in the coping phase, you're suppressing your desire to freak out. You're looking at the emergency to evaluate your options and to make sound decisions, or the best decisions you can. You may be without gear. You may not have a lot of options, but at least you face your situation with a critical mind. This doesn't mean that you won't make mistakes, and the problem with mistakes in a survival situation is they're blown up. Your mind blows them way out of proportion. You'll probably bounce back and forth between the crisis and coping phase, so you may find water or food, then you feel good for a couple hours, and then you jump right back into the crisis phase. In the coping phase, you're suppressing the urge to panic. You're thinking your way through the situation. You're attempting to be rational. And it's not that you won't have negative thoughts, but you just don't let them undermine you. So hope in the crisis phase in a survival situation. This is the part that I find really interesting. Some individuals stay in that crisis phase, that freak out survival mode, because they feel that everything's hopeless. And even a little bit of hope can get you towards the coping stage. The bridge between the crisis phase and the coping phase is having hope. Having hope and a strong desire to survive at all costs. So if you're hopeless, you're passively taking what comes your way, and your future is determined by the environment and those around you. Having hope doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy or you're super excited about the situation, but there's an ability there to cope. And this seems like common sense, but the studies show that people are not practicing this attempt to have hope. I mean, almost off the bat, there are people that just they give up right away. And you think a rational thinking human, like we're sitting here and I'm talking about this, you think, that's just not something that would happen. Well, it does. It really does. So I say here, I didn't realize that people just give up in a survival situation. I always imagined that people died because of the physical environment or lack of resources, but this isn't the case. So here's a couple of examples of the first one is a guy with no hope, and the second one is a guy with hope, and they're both in a survival situation. And this is basically how it turns out. So the first example, in the Canadian wilderness, a pilot ran into engine trouble and chose to dead stick his plane into a frozen lake rather than to punch out. After surveying the area, he noticed a wooded shoreline only 200 yards away from where food and shelter could be provided. Approximately halfway there, the pilot changed his mind and returned to the cockpit of his aircraft, where he smoked a cigar and then took his own life. Less than 24 hours later, a rescue team found him. So that's a guy with no hope. Less than 24 hours, and he takes his own life. Example number 2, the bridge between crisis phase to the coping phase. This guy's got hope. This guy's got heart. This guy didn't give up, and this guy wanted to survive. An Australian sergeant bailed out of his aircraft and landed in the desert with both legs broken. He used his parachute to bind up his wounded legs, but found he couldn't stand. Knowing his need for medical attention and the unlikelihood of rescue forces finding him, he crawled, dragging his leg for 4 days and 4 nights. The sergeant couldn't sleep at night due to a combination of anxiety and pain. He kept crawling, using the stars for navigation. He reached the point of total exhaustion on the 4th day and started blacking in and out and hallucinating. And that's probably because he didn't have any water. FEMA says you can only go 3 days without water. This guy made it 4. On the 4th day, he was found by a desert patrol, and he'd been without food and water for 4 days, and the sergeant survived. So that's a guy with broken legs in the middle of desert, behind enemy lines, from the outside looking in. That guy is not the one that's going to survive. If you had a true or false question about the 2 scenarios here, you would think for sure number 1 survives, number 2 doesn't, but it's actually the opposite. If you go over to ReadySquirrel.com and check the article out, you can watch this Ray Mears extreme survival video, Psychology of Survival. A really interesting story. The basic profile is about a family that lived in the bush of Alaska. It's a father, a son, and 2 teenage daughters. And their boat goes, their boat goes aground on a shoal, and it is hardcore. I mean, it's amazing that everybody survived, but this is a perfect example of mindset. Positive mindset, hope, and the desire, the desire to survive. Apathy is dangerous in a survival situation. That's kind of tied to hope, caused by a loss of hope or failure of the will to survive. You become a victim. How do you do this? So here's the jump right here. So we're going from the crisis phase to the coping phase. How do you get there? Like, how do you learn to plan for this in case you're in a situation like that? And the way you do that is you stay busy. You manage the survival situation so you don't lose hope. And, we got to be honest here. Some of this is personality, right? Some of it's personality based. You don't truly know what you're going to do until that situation arises. But these are things that you can do to put yourself in a better situation. So manage your survival situation. Set small, achievable tasks. Don't dwell on everything you have to do. So baby steps. Use your internal resources instead of negative thoughts. Think of home. Think of your kids. Think of a cold beer. Think of whatever you got to think of to get you through the survival situation. Learn stress management techniques like relaxation skills and deep breathing. Use time management. Plan your necessary tasks to reduce stress. Learn survival techniques. That's some stuff you can do before the fact. Learn bushcraft skills. Learn fire starting. Learn shelter building. Learn knot tying. All those things that you can use to make your situation a little more comfortable. So, what's another way to think about this? We can use acronyms. The first one is the Oda Thought Loop, which was designed by U.S. Air Force Colonel John Boyd as a decision cycle used by fighter pilots during dogfights. And the thought process leads you to action to help you maintain that survival mindset. So the first step is observe. The second step is orient. The third step is decide. And the fourth step is act. So it might look something like this. You're observing. Let's just say you're in a chopper. It crashes behind enemy lines, and this is what you see. This is your thought process. It's oversimplified. There's maybe some holes in here, but give you a general idea how the Oda loop works. You see a stream with cold running water. You notice that the area is flat and sheltered from wind. You see trash. You smell smoke from a fire. You see pine trees. You hear roadway noise in the distance. Number 2, step 2 of the Oda loop. You orient. After observing, you analyze the data you collected. It might look something like this. The stream provides drinking water and possibly food in the form of fish or mussels. The area is flat and sheltered from the wind, so it's an excellent location to build a survival shelter. You see trash and realize you may be close to civilization. The trash pile may have useful items. You smell smoke from a fire. You're possibly close to civilization. You see pine trees, pine boughs make good shelters. You hear a roadway noise. You're close to a road. You see that the sun is going down, so you'll lose daylight soon. 3, you make a decision. You decide to take action based on your current mental perspective. So basically, all of these decisions are based on the orientation that you've made off your observations. You act, you shelter, you decide, you do this. You decide, and then you take action. You take action. You shelter in place. You build a lean-to out of pine boughs. You look through the trash pile, find an old coffee can you can boil water with. You find a sheet of plastic and an old baby mattress. You use the mattress and pine boughs for your bedding. You use the plastic sheet to weatherize your shelter. You get water from the stream and boil it in a can. You check the stream and find some mussels. You cook them for food. You fall asleep. You wake up the next day, you do the exact same thing, and your mental model needs to be flexible and change with your environment. So you can't be super rigid. Here's another acronym that helps. This is out of the U.S. Army Field Manual, Survival. 8 steps to survival. Size up your situation. Size up your surroundings. Size up your physical condition. First aid is a priority. Size up your equipment. Step 2, use all of your senses. Stop and think. Study your situation. Think about the consequences of your actions and plan your moves. Remember where you are. You need to remember where you are in relation to your surroundings. Know where your camp is so you can get back to it. Where is the water in relation to your location? Where have you already searched? Be methodical. Vanquish fear and panic. They're the biggest enemies of survival. Fear and panic destroy your ability to make sound decisions. They cause you to react to feelings or imagination rather than the situation and the facts. I, improvise. Improvise with tools you have by using them for purposes other than those intended. Make tools from things that you find from something in nature. Kind of the idea of using the coffee can and the mattress to boil food and water in the previous scenario. Value living. This might be the most important thing right here. Value living. Sorry about that. Have stubbornness and a refusal to give up. Value your life. We dislike inconvenience and discomfort. Modern living has made us soft. The desire for comfort increases stress. Don't obsess about being uncomfortable. Make it your primary goal to survive. 7, act like natives. Follow animals to food and water. Live by your wits. This is stuff that you can do beforehand. Learn basic survival and bushcraft skills. Before you're in an environment, know about what kind of animals are there, what kind of fish are there, poisonous animals, edible plants for foraging. And then I've got some useful links here. If you're interested, you can go over to the article. I'll have a link in the conversation below. I've got a copy of the United States Army Survival Manual, PDF download. I've got the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, the SEER Manual from the Air Force. And I have a copy of the United States Marine Corps Survival, Evasion, and Recovery Manual. So you can go over there and check it out. I appreciate you listening. Thanks for taking a moment to sit around with me and shoot the breeze. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.